The morning that changed my life forever began like every other Thursday. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing hinted that by sunset I would be questioning every memory, every promise, and every decision I had made during the last 4 years of marriage. My name is Emma Carter. I was 34 years old, worked as a financial analyst, and considered myself practical. I believed in planning ahead, saving money, and solving problems logically. My husband Ryan often teased me for it. He liked to say I treated life like a spreadsheet. Maybe that was true, but there was one area of life where logic never stood a chance. Love. Like many people, I ignored warning signs because I loved the person standing in front of me. Ryan and I had been married for 4 years. We met at a charity fundraiser downtown. He was funny, confident, and effortlessly charming. Within minutes of meeting him, I felt comfortable in a way I rarely did with strangers. After growing up in a fractured family, comfort meant everything to me. My parents divorced when I was 10. My father eventually moved across the country and started another family. My mother drifted in and out of my life for years before disappearing completely. The person who truly raised me was my grandmother. She was strong, disciplined, and stubborn in all the best ways. Everything I know about resilience came from her. When she passed away, she left me a small lakeside cottage she had owned for decades. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly valuable compared to modern homes. But it was mine. More importantly, it was hers. Every summer of my childhood lived inside those walls. The old wooden dock, the tiny kitchen, the handmade curtains she refused to replace. Every corner carried memories. Whenever life became overwhelming, I drove out there and spent a weekend by the lake. The cottage felt like home in a way no other place ever could. Ryan knew how much it meant to me, or at least I thought he did. That Thursday morning, I arrived at work exhausted after spending most of the previous night finishing reports for an important client presentation. I grabbed coffee, settled into my office chair, and reached into my bag for my tablet. The moment the screen lit up, I frowned. The wallpaper wasn't mine. Instead of a mountain landscape, there was a picture of Ryan standing beside his brother Mark during a fishing trip. I immediately realized what had happened. We owned identical tablets. In my rush to leave the house, I had grabbed his by mistake. I considered turning it off and setting it aside. Then a notification appeared across the screen. Future Planning Group. A new message from Ryan's mother. Normally, I would have ignored it. I respected people's privacy. But before the notification disappeared, my eyes caught something. My name. I froze. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Without fully understanding why, I opened the message. The first thing I saw was Ryan's mother writing. "She'll eventually agree, just keep being patient." Below it, Mark responded. "I hope so. The investment opportunity won't stay available forever." I frowned. What investment? I kept scrolling. Another message appeared. This one made my heart skip. "If Emma uses part of her inheritance, everyone benefits." My inheritance. For a moment, I convinced myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe they were discussing something Ryan planned to mention later. Maybe I was overreacting. Then I continued reading. Message after message painted a completely different picture. They weren't discussing possibilities. They were discussing strategies, ways to persuade me, ways to pressure me, ways to convince me to contribute money toward Mark's newest business idea. My hands slowly tightened around the tablet. The conversation stretched back months. In some places, nearly a year. There were detailed discussions about my finances, my savings account, my investment portfolio, the trust fund my grandmother had left me, even the lakeside cottage. The farther I read, the worse it became. Ryan wasn't defending me. He wasn't shutting the conversations down. He was participating. One message from him nearly made me drop the tablet. "Emma is emotionally attached to the cottage. We need a different angle." Need a different angle. Not she loves that place. Not it's important to her. An angle. As though my feelings were an obstacle in a negotiation. I stared at the words until they blurred. The office around me disappeared. Phones rang. People talked. Printers hummed. None of it seemed real anymore. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. For years, I had trusted Ryan completely. I told him things I had never told anyone else. I shared fears, dreams, financial information, and personal memories. I believed marriage meant partnership. Meanwhile, he had apparently been sharing those details with his family behind my back. The realization felt like a physical blow. I closed the tablet and pushed it away. Then I stood up and walked to the restroom. The second the door closed behind me, I gripped the sink and stared at my reflection. My face looked pale. My eyes looked shocked. I barely recognized myself. For several minutes, I simply stood there trying to process what I had seen. Maybe there was context I didn't understand. Maybe Ryan had a reasonable explanation. Maybe no, the evidence was too clear. No explanation could justify months of secret discussions about another person's money, especially when that person was your wife. I returned to my desk but couldn't focus. Every memory from the past few years began replaying inside my mind. Ryan encouraging me to refinance the cottage. Ryan suggesting we merge all accounts. Ryan repeatedly mentioning how difficult things were for Mark. Ryan casually asking how much remained in my trust fund. At the time, none of those conversations seemed alarming. Now they felt completely different, like puzzle pieces finally falling into place. Around noon, my best friend Olivia called. The moment she heard my voice, she asked if something was wrong. I almost said no. Instead, I told her everything. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then Olivia said something I would never forget. "Emma, good people don't secretly strategize about someone else's inheritance." Simple, direct, impossible to argue with. After hanging up, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Ryan immediately. I wanted facts, not excuses, not emotional manipulation. Facts. That afternoon, I scheduled a consultation with a family attorney. The appointment was for the following day. Just making the call gave me a strange sense of relief. For the first time since discovering the messages, I felt like I was regaining control. When work finally ended, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before driving home. Part of me wanted to turn around. Part of me wanted to pretend none of this had happened. But reality doesn't disappear because you avoid it. Eventually, I pulled into the driveway. Ryan's car was already there. Lights glowed warmly through the living room windows. From the outside, everything looked normal. That was the terrifying part. A stranger walking past our house would have seen an ordinary married couple living an ordinary life. They would never have guessed that trust had already begun crumbling beneath the surface. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Ryan greeted me with a smile. "Hey, how was your day?" For a moment, I simply stared at him, the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, the man whose family had spent months discussing my finances like a business project. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to remain calm. Because tomorrow I would meet with an attorney. Tomorrow I would learn exactly where I stand. And tomorrow I would decide what happened next. What Ryan didn't know was that his secret was no longer a secret. The game had changed. And for the first time since reading those messages, I wasn't afraid. I was preparing. That night, I barely slept. Ryan lay beside me as if nothing had changed, breathing steadily while I stared at the ceiling in the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the messages again. The words replayed over and over in my mind. "We need a different angle." The sentence haunted me more than anything else. It wasn't just about money. It was about manipulation. It was proof that the conversations weren't innocent discussions. They were plans. By 6 o'clock the next morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I quietly got out of bed, showered, dressed for work, and left before Ryan woke up. I needed space to think. More importantly, I needed answers. My appointment with the attorney wasn't until late afternoon, but I spent the entire morning distracted. Every email felt impossible to focus on. Every meeting seemed endless. My mind kept returning to the same question. How long had this been happening? The messages I had seen covered nearly a year, but people don't suddenly begin discussing someone else's inheritance overnight. There had to be more. At lunchtime, I sat alone in my office and opened my laptop. For years, Ryan and I had shared certain household accounts. Utility bills, insurance documents, maintenance records for the cottage, nothing unusual for a married couple. At least that was what I thought. The deeper I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. 3 months earlier, Ryan had downloaded a property valuation report for the cottage. He had never mentioned it. 2 months before that, he had exchanged emails with a mortgage broker. Again, he never told me. The broker's response included information about accessing equity from inherited property. My pulse quickened. None of these actions were illegal, but together they painted a disturbing picture. Ryan wasn't simply discussing possibilities with his family. He had already been researching ways to turn those discussions into reality. I closed the laptop and rubbed my temples. For years, I had believed transparency was one of the strongest parts of our marriage. Now I wasn't sure transparency had ever existed. That afternoon, I met with the attorney. Her name was Karen Mitchell. She was calm, professional, and the kind of person who inspired confidence within minutes. After listening carefully to my story, she reviewed the documents I had brought and explained my legal position. The cottage remained solely mine. The trust fund remained mine. The inheritance accounts remained mine. Unless I voluntarily transferred ownership or mixed those assets improperly, they were protected. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, I felt myself breathe normally. "You're in a stronger position than you think," Karen said. "What should I do now?" I asked. She studied me for a moment. "That depends. Do you believe your husband made a mistake, or do you believe he revealed who he really is?" The question lingered in my mind long after I left her office, because deep down, I already knew the answer. When I arrived home that evening, Ryan was cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the kitchen. Normally, it would have made me smile. Instead, it felt strange, like walking through a set built to resemble my life. He greeted me warmly and kissed my cheek. I fought the urge to pull away. "How was work?" he asked. "Busy," he nodded. "Same here." Then he returned to stirring a pot on the stove. I watched him carefully. There was no guilt on his face. No sign that he had spent months discussing my inheritance behind my back. If anything, he seemed perfectly comfortable. That realization hurt more than I expected. People often imagine betrayal as dramatic. They picture shouting matches, slammed doors, and explosive confrontations. The truth is quieter. Sometimes betrayal looks like someone smiling at you over dinner while keeping secrets large enough to destroy a marriage. Over the next several days, I paid closer attention than ever before. And once I started looking, the patterns became impossible to ignore. Ryan's mother called constantly. Whenever she phoned, Ryan left the room. Mark suddenly seemed interested in visiting more often. Conversations repeatedly drifted toward finances, housing markets, and investment opportunities. One Sunday afternoon, Ryan casually mentioned that property values near the lake had increased significantly. I nearly laughed at the timing. Months earlier, I would have viewed the comment as harmless. Now it sounded like market research. A week later, another piece of the puzzle appeared unexpectedly. I was organizing files in our home office when I discovered a folder hidden inside a cabinet drawer. Inside were printed property reports, mortgage estimates, renovation projections, and one document that made my blood run cold. A detailed financial plan. At the top was a proposed timeline. Step 1, add Ryan to property ownership. Step 2, refinance. Step 3, access equity. Step 4, invest in family business. For several seconds I couldn't move. I simply stared at the page. My hands shook. My heart pounded. Because unlike text messages that could be explained away as brainstorming, this was a plan. An actual written plan. And Ryan had kept it hidden. The last bit of doubt inside me disappeared. That evening, I called Olivia. After hearing everything, she was silent for several moments. Finally, she sighed. "Emma, they're not asking you to join their future." "What do you mean?" "They're building their future with your resources." Her words landed with brutal accuracy. Because that was exactly what they were doing. Every conversation, every suggestion, every carefully crafted argument, all of it revolved around what I could provide. Not who I was, not what I wanted. What I could provide. The following Friday, everything finally exploded. I came home to find Ryan's mother and Mark sitting in my living room. No one had asked permission. No one had warned me. They were simply there. The moment I walked inside, I knew this wasn't a social visit. Ryan stood near the fireplace looking nervous. His mother offered a bright smile. "Emma, perfect timing." I slowly set my purse down. "What is this?" "We just wanted to have a family conversation," she replied. My stomach tightened. A family conversation. I had heard those words before. They usually meant someone wanted something. Sure enough, within minutes the topic shifted toward Mark's newest business proposal. According to him, an investor had backed out unexpectedly. The opportunity was supposedly too good to miss. They spoke enthusiastically about projected profits and future growth. Then Ryan's mother finally arrived at the real point. If everyone contributes a little, the whole family benefits. There it was. The request hidden beneath layers of politeness. I looked around the room. 3 pairs of eyes stared back at me expectantly, waiting, calculating, assuming. For the first time, I noticed something I had somehow missed for years. None of them were asking. Not really. They were expecting, as though my participation had already been decided. Something inside me hardened. I stood up. "No." The room fell silent. Mark blinked. Ryan looked uncomfortable. His mother forced a smile. "No, no," I repeated the word calmly. "Not investing." The smile vanished, almost instantly. It was fascinating how quickly politeness disappeared when money left the conversation. His mother's expression tightened. "Emma, family supports family." "I agree." "Then why are you refusing?" I looked directly at her. "Because supporting family and funding other people's plans are 2 different things." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mark crossed his arms. Ryan stared at the floor. No one spoke. Finally, his mother shook her head. "I think you're being selfish." The accusation didn't hurt the way she expected. Instead, it clarified everything. Because genuinely loving families don't call someone selfish for protecting themselves. They respect boundaries. They don't attack them. I picked up my purse. "I'm tired." Then I walked toward the bedroom. Behind me, I heard frustrated whispers, low voices, the sound of disappointment. But for the first time, their disappointment wasn't my responsibility. That night, as I sat alone in the darkness, I realized something important. The confrontation I had just witnessed wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The masks were slipping. The pressure was increasing. And sooner or later, Ryan would be forced to choose between his family and the truth. The only question was whether there was anything left worth saving by the time he made that choice. Deep down, I already suspected the answer. But I wasn't ready to say it aloud yet. The days following that confrontation felt strangely calm. But it wasn't the peaceful kind of calm. It was the kind that settles over the ground before a storm arrives. Ryan and I continued living in the same house, but something fundamental had changed between us. The distance wasn't physical. We still shared meals occasionally. We still exchanged polite conversations about work and daily responsibilities. Yet every interaction felt hollow. Every smile seemed rehearsed. Every word felt carefully measured. The trust that once connected us had disappeared, and without trust, marriage felt less like a partnership and more like 2 strangers occupying the same space. For nearly a week, Ryan avoided discussing what had happened in the living room. I think he hoped time would solve the problem. Some people believe that if they ignore a difficult situation long enough, emotions will cool and everything will return to normal. Unfortunately for him, I wasn't interested in returning to normal. Normal had brought me to this point. During that week, I continued meeting with my attorney. Karen helped me organize financial records, secure important documents, and prepare for every possible scenario. The more we reviewed, the clearer the situation became. My inheritance was legally protected, but protecting assets wasn't the only issue anymore. The real question was whether I wanted to remain married to someone who had spent years viewing my financial security as a resource to be managed rather than something to be respected. One evening, I returned home to find Ryan sitting alone in the kitchen. The house was unusually quiet. His mother and brother weren't there. The television wasn't on. He looked exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked. I placed my keys on the counter and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed heavily. "I know you're angry." The statement was almost laughable. Angry wasn't the right word. Anger implies temporary emotion. What I felt ran much deeper. I wasn't simply angry. I was disappointed, heartbroken, disillusioned. "Do you really think this is about being angry?" I asked quietly. Ryan looked away. No, for the first time in weeks he appeared genuinely uncomfortable. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "Mistakes," he rubbed his forehead. "Bad decisions, bad judgment, whatever you want to call it." I stared at him. Even now, he couldn't bring himself to say the truth. He couldn't call it betrayal, because doing so would force him to acknowledge the damage he had caused. Instead, he wrapped everything in vague language. Mistakes, bad decisions, poor judgment, words designed to soften reality. I leaned forward slightly. "Did you ever tell your family to stop discussing my inheritance?" Ryan didn't answer. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it told me everything. "Did you?" "No," the word landed between us like a stone. I nodded slowly. "Did you ever tell them the cottage wasn't their business?" "No." "Did you ever defend me when they discussed ways to pressure me?" Again, silence. Again, the answer was obvious. I felt something inside me finally settle. For weeks I had searched for uncertainty, some explanation, some hidden detail capable of changing the story. There wasn't one. The truth was simple. Ryan had known exactly what was happening, and he had allowed it not once, not twice, for years. "You know what hurts the most?" I asked. He looked up. I continued before he could respond. "It's not the money." His expression tightened. "It's not the cottage, it's not the trust fund. It's not any of that." I swallowed hard. "It's realizing that every time your family talked about me like I was an opportunity, you stayed quiet." Ryan closed his eyes. For a moment, genuine shame crossed his face. But shame arrived far too late. The next morning, I filed for divorce. The moment I signed the paperwork, I expected overwhelming sadness. Instead, I felt relief. Not happiness, not excitement, relief. Like finally setting down a weight I had been carrying for years without realizing it. When Ryan received the documents, his reaction was immediate. He called repeatedly, sent messages, asked to meet, promised counseling, promised change, promised anything he thought might alter my decision. But promises only matter before trust is broken. Afterward, they become negotiations, and I was finished negotiating. News of the divorce spread quickly through his family. His mother called me 3 times in one day. I didn't answer. Then she began leaving voicemails. At first, she sounded upset, then angry, then openly hostile. According to her, I was destroying the family. I was selfish, ungrateful, cold-hearted. The accusations continued for nearly 2 weeks. What fascinated me was that none of the messages contained an apology. Not one. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No recognition of their behavior. Only complaints about the consequences. That told me everything I needed to know. People who regret hurting someone focus on the pain they caused. People who regret getting caught focus on the inconvenience they suffered. The divorce process lasted several months. Compared to many divorces, it was relatively straightforward. There were no children involved. Most assets remained separate. Even so, the emotional toll was significant. Some days were easier than others. Certain memories appeared unexpectedly. A favorite restaurant, a photograph, a song playing in a grocery store. Grief doesn't disappear just because leaving is the right decision. You can mourn a relationship while still knowing it needs to end. As winter gave way to spring, I gradually began rebuilding my life. I spent more weekends at the cottage. The place felt different now, not because it had changed, because I had. For years, I viewed the cottage as a reminder of the past. Now I saw it as proof of resilience. My grandmother had worked hard to create stability. She understood something I had forgotten. Security isn't selfish. Independence isn't selfish. Protecting yourself isn't selfish. One afternoon, while cleaning old boxes in the attic, I discovered a handwritten letter from her. I didn't remember seeing it before. The paper had yellowed with age. Carefully, I unfolded it and began reading. Most of the letter contained ordinary family memories, stories from her childhood, advice about work, comments about life. Then I reached a paragraph that stopped me cold. It read, "Never confuse love with obligation. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. The people who benefit from crossing them will always try to convince you those boundaries are selfish. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I sat quietly by the window overlooking the lake. Tears finally came. Not because I missed Ryan, not because I doubted my decision, but because my grandmother had understood this lesson long before I did. And even years after her passing, she was still protecting me. By the time summer arrived, the divorce was finalized. The judge signed the final documents on a bright Tuesday morning. When I left the courthouse, sunlight filled the streets. Cars moved through traffic. People hurried to work. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything felt different. A chapter of my life had ended, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. A few months later, I received a promotion at work. The raise was substantial. The new position carried more responsibility than any role I had held before. My manager later admitted that he had considered me for leadership years earlier, but worried I lacked confidence. Looking back, I realized he wasn't entirely wrong. For too long, I had prioritized keeping peace over protecting myself. I confused accommodation with kindness. I confused sacrifice with love. Learning the difference changed everything. As my confidence grew, other areas of life improved as well. I reconnected with friends, started traveling again, pursued hobbies I had abandoned years earlier. Slowly, the future stopped feeling frightening. It started feeling exciting. One evening near the end of summer, I sat alone on the dock behind the cottage. The lake reflected shades of gold and orange as the sun began disappearing below the horizon. The air smelled of pine trees and water. Everything was quiet. For a long time, I simply watched the sunset. Then I thought about Ryan. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just perspective. The truth was that losing him hadn't destroyed my life. Discovering the truth had saved it. Had I never seen those messages, I might have spent years slowly surrendering pieces of myself. Years convincing myself that pressure was normal. That manipulation was love. That boundaries were selfish. Instead, I learned something far more valuable. The right people don't love you because of what you can provide. They don't calculate your worth through property, money, or opportunity. They value your presence, your character, your heart. And anyone who sees you primarily as a resource isn't offering love at all. They're offering a transaction. As darkness settled across the lake, I smiled for the first time that day. The cottage remained exactly where it had always been, solid, steady, safe, a gift from someone who loved me enough to think beyond her own lifetime. For years, I believed my grandmother's greatest inheritance was the property itself. I was wrong. Her greatest inheritance was the lesson attached to it. Know your worth, protect your peace, and never stay where your value is measured by what someone can take from you. The water gently touched the edge of the dock. The last sunlight disappeared beyond the trees. I stood up and walked back toward the cottage, toward home, toward the future. And this time, I was walking there entirely on my own terms.